Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I forgot my microphone the other side of my table. I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for tuning into today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble. Today, I have a special guest with me from the United States. Krikorian. He's a political scientist. His focus is on the U.S. foreign policy, and we had some chit chats on X recently. We agree and disagree on some topics, and it would be very interesting to have a conversation with Danny, as he is also a political scientist with greater focus on what's happening around the world. And always agreeing and disagreeing is healthy, especially in the current poisonous environment where it has become difficult to speak with each other, and especially on social media platforms. And I have to really recognize this. I have no patience at all to argue with someone typing and coming, typing and arguing and speaking with someone. So better to speak to the person. Danny, welcome to the show. First of all, I'm happy to have you today on my channel. Secondly, I would like to start this conversation with you with a personal question. You are a doctor in political science, right? You studied PhD. You have done PhD.
I actually have a master's only. I do not have a doctorate.
Master degree in political science. It's interesting to see Armenians studying political science, humanities, social sciences, because in our culture, somebody who studies, we have to become a doctor or an engineer, or if you are a failure to your parents, then you are a pharmacist or something less. So what encouraged you to study political science? In 2005, when I picked international relations and diplomacy, I assure you, 99% of the Armenian community in Aleppo had really strange comments about that.
Yeah, I can sympathize completely. Yes, when I guess the main thing is it's almost instinctive for me as a kid who came to the United States at the age of 6. As soon as I reached my teenage years and started to get close to my first years in college, is when I realized that politics is something that is like in my blood, and I live and breathe it. I wake up every day. It's almost like a religion to me, and that's when I noticed that I'm a little bit different than the average Arab, as far as Arab and Armenian, as far as what our career trajectory is going to be like. And I think the main issue here is that it's my heritage. My grandmother is an Armenian Palestinian, and so yes, born in Jerusalem, and so this is deeply ingrained in me. So I think I was born with this this defense of Palestine, this almost Arab nationalism, I guess you could call it. And this is the real main drive and motivator that pushed me to pursue political science.
Actually, that's very interesting. And to have a grandmother from Jerusalem, itself is a motivation for someone to dig in more about what's happening in West Asia. Myself, what motivated me the most were the traumas that my grandparents or my parents used to tell me about the Armenian genocide when we were in Armenia. So I grew up in a more politicized environment. But then the events in West Asia, like the invasion of Iraq, you have the Afghanistan war, you have the invasion of Lebanon, the Gaza massacres all the time. You know, in the region, we have all these TV channels are showing you the footage of what's happening in Palestine and or later in Syria, Iraq, and all these places. They motivated me to become I never chose to be a journalist. I don't even consider myself a journalist. I didn't want to become a journalist. My career path was like, I'm going to become a politician. I'm going to become a diplomat. I would like to represent my country because I believed in justice. And this was my motivation. I wanted to make things right and correct, and also help. I consider Syria my country, and I'm ethnic Armenian, but I grew up there. My father always told me, like, we have a debt to the Syrians because they saved our grandparents. So he says, like, on our neck, this debt remains on our neck, so we have to pay it back.
Sure.
Secondly, my father served in the military just like any other man, and he was called as a reservist as well in the 80s during the Muslim Brotherhood uprising against the Hafez al-Assad government. So he served in the military for 5 years, and he loved the military. It's like, unlike many other young men who try to escape the military service, my father loved the military. And he used to tell me, you will never become a full grown up man unless you serve in the military. And he always used to mock me because I didn't serve in the military, and said, you are not as man as I am. But when the war erupted, in 2011, actually, when I ended my studies, international relations and diplomacy, I had I was very interested also to volunteer in a military academy in Aleppo. And this was in 2011. I thought, like, if I study international relations and diplomacy and pursue more military studies and go to an academy, I would become a successful officer in the Syrian military, you know?
Mm.
And this was in 2011, because I finished my studies 2010, and in 2011 the war started in Syria, and my father started watching these videos of militants attacking the military installations, beheading these soldiers. So he freaked out. He
Yeah.
changed his opinion completely of encouraging me to go to the military into, like, are you really sure you want to go to the military? You know, the tone has changed all of a sudden, because he was really worried of me, let's say. But then there's a lot happening nowadays in West Asia. Let's start with Lebanon.
Sure.
Ben-Gvir was yesterday, he made a statement. Netanyahu also made a statement. Everything indicates in the region that the Israeli side wants to go into a full-fledged war against Lebanon. They're talking about turning Beirut into Gaza 2.0. How realistic do you think this scenario is, that Israel goes into full-fledged war against Lebanon, knowing that, if we put this in a context, we have Hezbollah that has 4, 5, 6 times more strength than Hamas itself?
Mm. So I would say that it's quite unrealistic.
Mm.
Um, when we're talking about Lebanon, it's a completely different situation than when we're talking about Gaza and Palestine. And so, personally, it would feel like a dramatic escalation of the conflict. And but that being said, the Israeli government seems to be at a point of no return. And so, at this point, for them, this appears like a mechanism to I don't want to say perpetuate the war, but to kind of keep eyes off of Gaza and keep eyes on anything else. Uh, but yeah, so I ultimately I would say that it's an unrealistic project. I don't know. I don't. It's an act of desperation. Is ultimately what I'm trying to say. It's an act of desperation. It shows the desperation of the Israeli government. It shows that the Gaza war did not kind of turned the world against Israel, even some of its allies, and so as a result now there's more inflammatory statements from state officials, and there's more a bigger search for conflict with other states and other entities. But I think that it's more of a sign of desperation. It's more of a sign of Israel's vulnerability at the current time than it is a sign of strength and a display of strength.
Yes. I totally agree with you that this is a sign of vulnerability. But do you mean here that Israel feels that it has lost its deterrence capacity here vis-a-vis Hezbollah, so they want to prove that they're able to counter these attacks? Because what happened in the people who followed the growth of Hezbollah in 2006, Hezbollah relied on the strategy of overwhelming the Israeli air defenses with just unguided Katyushas,
Uh-huh.
hundreds of rockets per day. I mean, they can intercept maybe half of them. So, but these rockets do not really inflict big damages, and they're not
Yes.
guided missiles. But what Hezbollah developed in the past 15, 18 years, that they still have these Katyushas, many of them, probably tens of thousands of them, but they added also their guided, sophisticated missiles. Therefore, the strategy nowadays, if Israel attacks Lebanon, Hezbollah is capable of completely paralyzing the air defense systems of the Israeli side, one by overwhelming them through these unguided rockets, and then they have the ones with the GPS and with even the cameras that we're watching nowadays, all this footage coming from southern Lebanon. They are documenting the attack on these military installations. So, in such a scenario, as you mentioned, it shows the vulnerability of Israel. They're trying to prove something, they are unable to prove it in this case.
Yeah.
So I see it as a suicidal mission. And at the same time, I see it that the United States doesn't want this war because they know what's going to happen if this war starts. So don't you think here Israel is pushing this war against the will of the United States? So this is not in the interest of the Americans. So Israelis are dragging the Americans into conflict.
Yes, I would agree with that partially. I would say at this point it's hard to determine what the Americans see as a pro or con. I
Yeah.
feel that um, it's really hard to gauge that as far as whether America sees further engagement with Middle Eastern enemies on behalf of Israel as detrimental, because it's mostly just rhetoric. We hear it, we often hear about it, but at the same time, no matter who's no matter what administration, political parties in power in the United States, the underlying tone is that the support is there regardless of what happens. So, as far as Israel going into Lebanon, I don't think that America would. Um, I don't think that. I think that the red line is an illusion. I
Mm,
think the red line is an illusion. Um, and the genocide in Gaza is evidence of that. So, as far as whether America would rather not for this to happen, I'm sure everybody in the world would rather for it not to happen. But even Israel maybe might not want to necessarily go into Lebanon if circumstances would permit. But I would say that that ultimately it's a matter of um, goes back to the idea of Israel's desperation.
yeah. Totally. And in this case, how do you see the what is called the axis of resistance is doing after the October 7 events in terms of the we have the Ansarullah in Yemen, we have Hezbollah in Lebanon, we have some of the paramilitary groups in Iraq, and Syria is still considered the route for the weapon deliveries to some of these armed groups against, or the resistance groups against the Israeli occupation forces. Do you see that their role is crucial here, or they're just participating on the periphery, let's say, of this conflict?
Um, I actually believe that they're crucial,
Mm,
and I feel that the this is part of the reason why this current conflict is different than previous conflicts. In 2006, I believe it was the year when Israel and Hezbollah went to war, and at the time we didn't have this triple alliance, or we could say this these three different entities kind of isolating Israel or surrounding Israel. So um, that being said, I do feel like these three entities do pose a greater threat to Israel, and I feel like they're actually part of the reason why the Houthis and Hamas are part of the reason why Israel is going to seek greater conflict with Hezbollah, because uh, it sees essentially Hezbollah as an extension of those two, and maybe in a way where it could kind of go, it could kind of challenge Hezbollah without
Yeah.
necessarily being seen as a full-fledged international war.
Mm. But in this case, I had a comment on X. I would like to screen this comment, and this is related to Syria. But I wanted to connect it with what's happening. I said, if you observe the military attacks by Hezbollah and Israeli military posts in the north, and you're honest, you will realize that a significant motive behind the U.S. and its regional allies' regime change war against Syria's Assad was to sever the supply routes of weapons from Syria to Lebanon. Had ISIS or al-Nusra succeeded in overthrowing Assad, their subsequent objective would have been to invade Lebanon and combat Hezbollah. Consequently, Hezbollah would have been occupied fighting against ISIS extremists when Israel launched its attack on Gaza. I received mixed, let's say, opinions about this, and we are living in a polarized world. Some people say it's a ridiculous argument. Some people say I totally agree with you. Where do you stand on this? Do you think that a significant motive of the U.S. and the Zionist neocon project in Syria, one of the motives was to cut these routes into Lebanon? That's why they wanted to get rid of Assad?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a clear, very as clear and explicit, but I would say that it's highly possible because it falls in line with the policy and ideology and agenda that has been pursued by Israel, that has been pursued by the United States foreign policy.
Yes.
Um, and so we can see with projects like Al Qaeda, with projects like ISIS, with these with these terrorist organizations that are radical, and they're often being used to destabilize civil society, and they're ultimately always serving the cause, or serving, how do you say, they're ultimately always typically against the traditional axis of resistance. So
Mm,
like with Al Qaeda or with ISIS, it was always like, um, Israel is the rhetorical enemy, but we have to fight all the Shias and make sure we
yes.
get Shias out. So I strongly believe that the war in Syria was an attempt at regime change, and that that ISIS was a an attempt to kind of weaken the opposition.
Mhm. What do we disagree on Syria? What have we argued on X previously about Syria?
Good question. Good
Good
question.
question. Because
Uh,
if we agree on this headline, and that is what happened in Syria was an attempt for regime change, and there were these terrorist groups spawned due to the conflict in Syria. This is an extension of the Islamic State in Iraq. And also, all the indications were there that these terrorist groups will expand in Syria. So, what do we disagree on in Syria?
Good question. It's funny. It's funny to ask that because I don't think we disagree very much. What's interesting is that we have to consider where we are. You are where exactly now? Speak.
Berlin.
Berlin. Okay.
Mm,
You have to consider that here in America we have, which I'm sure you're aware of, a quite one-sided narrative in the media.
mhm,
So this takes a toll on us, whether
mm,
we believe it or not.
mm,
And after years and years of exposure to this information, start to question what you believe, especially when 95% of the population believes this. So I think that it allows me to play the role of contrarian, to
mhm,
question what I believe, even to question the the legitimacy of the suggestion that this is a regime change against Assad. And at one point, I even started to consider the fact that it wasn't the case, but there's facts, there's opinions,
mhm.
and ultimately the facts point in that direction. So
To
I
which
don't.
direction do you believe was the fact?
The facts I feel just support the conclusion that that this was a regime change war, that this was an attempt to oust uh, um, a sovereign leader, to violate the sovereignty of Syria, and to ultimately just destabilize the entire Middle East. And yeah.
And for the interest of who, like this is the real question. Like, why did do you not? Syria didn't pose, let's say, a serious security threat against American interests in the region, and the Syrian, they call it a regime, but the Americans have been cooperating with this regime for a long time in terms of Al Qaeda terrorism in the region. They even sent Al Qaeda operatives to Syria to be imprisoned in Syrian dungeons. A Syrian government foiled, I think, 2 terrorist attacks against American embassy in Damascus. So they were cooperating in this case. But the main, this is just my opinion. So why do I believe that they wanted to remove Assad from power? There are different components for this. One is, of course, the Russian Navy in the Mediterranean, and this has coincided with the coup in Ukraine 3 years later of the beginning of the regime change war in Syria. So what they wanted to do is to kick the Russians out of the Black Sea and kick them out of the Mediterranean. And in both cases, historically, if you see, the Russians have gone into quite big wars to protect their access in the Black Sea. So when they had a fleet in the Mediterranean, this was the link point for them from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So they have an access to the international waters, and the Russians now can exert their sea power on the world. So first things first, they wanted to remove the Russians from the Mediterranean. Secondly, the Iranian factor. The Iranian factor is very important because Iran and Syria are strategic allies, and Iran has invested so much in the region in terms of how they are going to minimize the American and Israeli hegemony and the dominance over the region. And Syria was a key player in this. Syria has allowed the growth of the Iranian influence over the region and has given Iran lots of access to Syria and through Syria to Lebanon. And Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah delivered some of these weapons to Gaza. And Syria has played also the role of delivering the weapons, let's say, to Hezbollah. So they wanted to really stop this because without this route of flow of weapons to Hezbollah, Hezbollah will be encircled, and then Hamas will be encircled eventually, right? And I believe also the third reason is the gas. So the Qataris offered to Assad to extend their pipelines from Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, and then Turkey will distribute to Europe. So Turkey will become an energy hub, and the Qatar will become an energy powerhouse. Like they will have enormous influence over West Asia and on Europe itself. But the point of the American side was, if we succeed to bring Qatari gas to Europe, then the Europeans will no longer need the Russian gas, the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. So this was what the Russians were awake, and they understood this situation. And Assad rejected the offer anyway. So the Qataris went like a true bulldog against Assad. They wanted to kill him like they killed Gaddafi, right? So this is also very, very important in my opinion. The fourth one, and the fourth one, which is a conspiracy theory, it is still a theory, but it's convenient if we follow it. The hardcore Zionist theorists, they preach the Greater Israel, and where the borders of the Greater Israel starts from the Nile in Egypt, and it ends on the western shore of the Euphrates. And who will border the Greater Israel on the eastern shore of the Euphrates are the Kurds. This is according to them, to these theorists. And what you see is, where are the American occupation forces are located today? On the eastern shore of the Euphrates. And who have they armed there and encouraged them to separate from Syria are the Kurds. So it's like you start questioning, like, is this also part of the conspiracy against Syria? Were they preparing for this? Probably, I don't know. But none of the reasons that the Americans wanted to remove Assad from power were for good reasons. Like, I lived in Syria. I swear to God, I know how corrupted the system is. It's like, if you don't pay, you're not going to have your papers. Forget about it. Like in anywhere you go, it's so obvious in front of your eyes. I know how Syria operates, but I also like the foreign policy of Syria. And
Sure.
I know that they targeted Syria because of its foreign policy, not because of all this corruption and shit that is going on in Syria,
Indeed, indeed. I agree with that statement.
Yeah. So I will show you a video now of Trump. Yesterday he was on Fox News. And why I'm going to play this video, because we have the elections coming to your country, and you're an American right now, so you can vote.
I'm not an American citizen, but I am. Yes.
Okay. So, but can you vote or you cannot vote?
No.
You cannot vote. Okay. So we have so much discussion now about the upcoming American elections,
Sure.
And
Kevork, if you don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. If you don't mind.
Yes.
I just need to grab my charger from my phone. So
no worries. Yes, Kanti. I will. No worry. So, in my opinion, guys, what's happening in this election discussion in the United States, between Biden and Trump, in terms of the foreign policy, I don't see much of a difference between them. Maybe, I'm saying, probably, Trump would have a better course vis-a-vis Russia. So we could probably avoid the World War III scenario in terms of this conflict. But when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to China, Taiwan, Trump is no different from Biden. And he will also support Israel, and even more, in my opinion, because he's the base of the Republicans. Many of them are from these Christian Zionists, the evangelicals in the United States. Therefore, I truly believe if Trump comes to power, he will increase the support for the Israeli occupation forces. I mean, remember that he was the one who recognized the Golan Heights as part of the Israeli sovereignty, and also moved the embassy from Jerusalem. No, not from Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I will bring Danny back to the stage. Danny, welcome back to the stage. I was telling them that this election debate in the United States, it's in simple terms, it's in terms of the foreign policy, it's like same shit, different smell, Yeah. And the problem is that there is so much talk about how Trump is a peace candidate nowadays, and he could be probably saying a little bit better vis-a-vis the Ukraine war, in terms of we're going very fast now into a nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. But when it comes to Palestine, he is worse, in my opinion. He can be worse than Biden. And I'm not advocating for Biden, by the way. I hate the guy. I call him a genocide Joe. But he could be worse than Biden because his popular base, many of the Christian Zionists vote for him, and the evangelicals. And so this is what he had to say. I will just play the video that he was yesterday on Fox News, and we discuss it together.
So, number one, they have to finish the job. Israel has to finish that job. They have to finish it quickly, strongly, and they have to get back to life again, because it's taking too long. They have to finish the job.
You're saying go in, win, and finish.
You gotta win. The attack on October 7th, and it's getting more and more demeaned. They're demeaning it. I have people now telling me they don't think the attack ever happened. And take a look. You watch the news reports.
I have the
where
50
people
minutes
that are
of video.
protesting. Sure, I know you do, and so do I. But here's the thing. You watch these people on television, and then just like you have Holocaust deniers also. They say the Holocaust never took. It's the exact same people. They're saying it never happened. AOC +3. Israel was the most powerful lobby in the country 15 years ago. Today, between Tlaib and AOC and all of these people, what they're doing, Israel, they don't have the backing that they once had.
You'll give it to them.
Yeah, I'm good. But they don't have the backing. Even Schumer has become like a Palestinian. Chuck Schumer, Jewish, always strong for Israel. He's become like a Palestinian.
Called for elections in the middle of a war.
Yeah, it's a very bad thing. It's a very sad thing, and it's a very dangerous thing. But if you look, so many people, I watch on your show where they're going and interviewing these people that are protesting just recently at Columbia and the different places. They say, we don't believe October 7th ever happened. And they may believe that, you know, they may actually believe that, but they have to get the job done. They have to get in there and they have to get it done.
Danny, there are a few points here. First, he says that Israel has to finish the job very fast and they have to win, which is completely unreasonable thing to say. Secondly, he says that he compared the October 7 or those who support probably the Palestinians to the Holocaust deniers. And he said the Israel lobby is not as powerful as it used to be 15 years ago, which is complete, in my opinion, factually incorrect. And he compared Chuck Schumer to a Palestinian. Like he used the term Palestinian like it's a slander, you know, he's becoming like a Palestinian.
Yes.
These politicians just horrify me. He, Nikki Haley, and everyone who is just worshiping Israel. Like there is Israel first and not America first.
Exactly.
It's very troublesome to see politicians in the United States trying to prove who is more pro-Israel than the other. You have the RFK, you have now Trump. How do you see Trump could be different in terms of the foreign policy in these two cases? Ukraine, first let's start with Israel vis-a-vis Palestine, and then we touch on Ukraine.
Sure. So I would say that Donald Trump is merely rhetorical. Everything he says is merely for show. And proof of that is his 2016 to 2020 presidency. I mean, there are some things that we can highlight, such as the assassination of Soleimani, and maybe some other things as far as going off of the trajectory, the traditional trajectory. But as far as what Donald Trump says and what Donald Trump does, what he believes and what the policy actually, what policy manifests, I've noticed that Donald Trump is perfectly in line with the past half century of American politics and American foreign policy. It's actually, all it is just an intensification. It's not a change of course. It's ultimately, like you said, there's a tradition, this evangelical Christian Zionist tradition in America that is, I would say, we don't want to say, we don't want to use numbers, but I would say a large swath of the population in America espouses this support for Israel from a religious perspective.
Yes.
So, and you know, what we have to touch on is the fact that Donald Trump runs on this platform of non-interventionism, which also is something that we have to dissect, because I'm not sure how assassinating Soleimani fits into that. And so I feel like Trump is, he has a lot of support from heads of state, and he has a lot of support from ideologues, and this allows him to buy time. This allows him to say things and then contradict himself, in whatever, and to do whatever he can to portray himself and America as the upper hand and the dominant force. But as far as comparing him to Biden, I don't like the binary thinking and the simplistic binary thinking, because but unfortunately the majoritarian democratic system in this country forces us to choose between two different candidates. However, ultimately both candidates are candidates of rhetoric.
Yes.
Say one thing, do the other, and they're both candidates that are pro-Israeli, that have ultimately given the green light to Israel to do whatever it needs in order to preserve itself. And so, that being said, I do not see a difference, and I would say that it's more of this Orwellian doublethink, where we have
Yes.
these two candidates that are supposed to, we have a liberal fascism and a conservative thing. So, from that regard, I would say that Donald Trump is simply just another uh, uh, recipe or an ingredient in the recipe of neoconservatism. Joe
Hmm.
Biden is also an ingredient of that recipe.
What about RFK
Same.
in this matter? The same.
The same, yeah. I would say that he's intended to take votes from other more legitimate independent candidates like Jill Stein, Cornel
Hmm.
West.
It feels for me that he is not genuine in his support to Israel. Like
Ah,
there are probably two factors. I don't know. I'm just speculating. One of which is because he understands how the elections happen in the United States and what type of votes he needs to win an election. He
true.
knows the strength and the influence of the APAC, and probably they also have something on him, blackmailing him. It's like he's been taking photos with this Rabbi Shmuley all the time and probably posting it. And this guy, he's called the Rabbi Dildo or something like.
Exactly.
And it's so ridiculous. This guy is like intellectually corrupt person. And his role. This is my opinion from what I observe. What he posts from materials and posts and videos. He wants to increase the level of anti-Semitism around the world because Zionism thrive on anti-Semitism. He just gives bad reputation for the Jewish people. Like he is doing it on purpose,
Yes.
just the. And I truly believe that this guy is, of course, is an asset for the Israeli government or the Mossad. I don't know. And then you see that he's just being hanging around with RFK. He's hanging around with former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who suddenly changed her position from anti-war into a neocon when it came to Gaza. If she is watching this podcast because she follows me on X, that's surprising. Tulsi Gabbard, it's really, I would say, she knows the truth. What's happening in Palestine? She told us the truth about what was happening with the peaceful protests in Gaza in 2019. And she criticized Israel. She was in Syria. She understood the role of the neocons in burning everything in the region. You cannot come and tell me she doesn't know what's happening now in the Gaza Strip. But she has an aspiration again. She wants to probably become the vice president for Trump. It's like she started to kiss the hands, like before becoming the vice president.
It's okay to dismiss the moral premise of her beliefs, and now it's okay to
Yeah. I will send her a message and invite her to come. I truly suspect that she will come to Syriana Analysis, but I will be very respectful with her. I will just invite her and listen to her. I'm saying this because one of our commentators says I should invite a former U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. His name is Jack Madlock Jr. Okay, I typed his name, guys, and I haven't heard him before. Heard his interviews. They say he's over 90 years old, but he is very fit and he's giving interviews, not like Joe Biden, who cannot form two sentences nowadays. So I will search for him, guys, and if I find him a contact email, something, I will send him an invite. Danny, the last part of this, before we start the last part, guys, it goes without saying that the X account of Danny is in the description below, and also I will add his research in the description when this live streaming is over. It's called Ethnic Exclusion and Conflict in the Caspian, Comparing Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. And this was submitted to the University of Central Florida in 2018, right? I will add this research also in the description below if you're interested, guys. Let's go to Ukraine, the last part, because I feel like we're living our last months on this planet, and we are, and I don't really try to fearmonger, I truly, the other day I was listening to Jeffrey Sachs on Tucker Carlson show, and he told us a story that I never heard of, and how one of the Soviet submarines have lost its path and they were under the waters, and this was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And when they came to the surface of the water, they thought they're coming under attack, and under the protocol of these nuclear submarines, if you come under attack, you attack with nuclear weapons. This is the nuclear doctrine. And the captain of the submarine gave the order to fire nuclear turbines against the United States. And his colleague, who was not the captain of the submarine, but he was militarily, he had a higher position than him, he was the one who said, we have to wait, because they thought they were coming under attack and they were not coming under attack. So even a human mistake could happen, that we could end up into nuclear Armageddon. And this is serious. Americans have thousands of warheads, and the Russians have thousands of warheads. They have the capacity to destroy the universe 60 times. So everything could be over. Now that the Western governments have given the Ukrainian armed forces the permission to use their weapons against Russian targets inside Russia, two of these, not the radars, but those are detecting systems. So they detect the attacks before they arrive, so they can intercept them quickly. And this is can be used for detecting nuclear attacks against Russia. So those were attacked, two of them. And I was reading about the nuclear doctrine of Russia today, or one of our friends shared it on X, and I would just screen this. And it says one of the conditions determining the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons, quote, the enemy's impact on critical state or military facilities of the Russian Federation, the failure of which will lead to the disruption of the response actions of nuclear forces. And this is exactly what happened the other day when the Ukrainians hit the early alert systems of the Russian radars. And those were meant also to detect attacks, nuclear attacks against Russia. How do you see the Western allowance for the Ukrainian armed forces to hit Russia from inside? What is the end game of the Western governments here?
Terrible mistake. Terrible decision, I would say, to allow that to happen. I wouldn't call it a mistake, because clearly it's given an okay by the West. But I would say that this is an escalation that is most likely a point of no return, and kind of exposes the how could you say the I don't want to say the connection to what's going on in Israel and Gaza, but the similarity, and shows how there's this Western ambition for destabilization, Western ambition for hegemony, dominion, and that this ambition comes at any cost. And so that includes even potential nuclear fallout with Russia. And I think that ultimately what's the driving force here, the main motivator, is ideology. It's ideology.
You're very correct.
That's the basis of it, and it's really the basis of neoconservatism.
And this is something that I realized this after the Ukraine war, to be honest with you, because the Americans, of course, I'm also exposed to American information, so I swallow lots of American narratives. And in my opinion, always we were the ideologues. In the Middle East, we are hardcore ideologues, and then you realize that no, these people are also hardcore ideologues, exactly. But they're projecting it on us.
Exactly.
One of the commentators say the high-ranking Soviet naval officer who rescinded foiled the atomic launch order by the captain is also the same person who survived the K-19 sub incident that was made into a movie. So this is a serious issue that happened back then. Yes, it was a Russian who saved us from the end. I have no idea why we are supposed to hate Russia. I think we have many of the same ideals. We should be great friends. I don't get it. I mean, myself, I would like to take the good things from Russia, and for example, about the family values and traditional diplomatic approach towards and. When a Russian leader gives a word, it means a word. It's like
Yes.
in the Western officials, you feel like they're tricking you when they are shaking your hands. Like they shake your hands today and they kill you tomorrow, like they did with Gaddafi. Like it's
The opposite.
exactly. And I'm not pro-Russian. I'm not pro-Chinese. I detest the international system, the way it is built, that is so unjust for the majority of the world. That's why I would like it to be more just for the majority of the people around the world, because we can speak about democracy as a formula for internal political affairs for the people. But if the international system is a unipolar and the United States is able to impose its will, then this is already an international dictatorship. So first, I would like to liberate myself from this international umbrella of dictatorship built by the United States. Then we can, on a smaller levels in these countries, they can find their own way. And this is not the American job to come and impose their liberal democracies around the world. Danny, last point, and because I saw today another article that says, I just want to screen it here, Germany, and I live in Germany, and I hope this is not going to be the case. Germany defense minister calls for war readiness by 2029. Germany's Boris Pistorius has said the country needs to prepare for a worst-case scenario regarding the specter of war in Europe. He also said a return to some form of military conscription would likely be necessary. So the same rhetoric, Ursula von der Leyen, the UK, everybody's now talking about. We have to reintroduce military service, and they're checking the bunkers. I truly believe this is a psyop. They're psyoping their own people because they need to spend more money now on the military, and they don't know how to spend that. They wanted to bring these budgets to spend to dedicate a big budget for the environment. They couldn't do it. They tried under the pandemic. They couldn't do it, and now they found the boogeyman. Russia is coming to invade us. And do you see that this is a psyop by these governments, or there is a genuine threat from Russia? I really want to know your opinion, because I don't see that Russia has neither the interest to invade Europe nor the capacity to invade Europe.
Yeah, no, I certainly believe that it's purely propaganda made. I agree with your assessment of that. I mean, obviously, there's always there's the threat of a genuine conflict spilling over. But as far as what Russia's interests are, regardless of how much the Western propaganda, Western media frames.
It's the same.
Yeah, same thing. Western media frames it. I don't see Russia as the actual aggressor.
Actually, the other day I was reading an article. I think it's in the American Conservative website. It's called The American Conservative. And the author was arguing that any self-respected country who has, I don't know if he used the term superpower, but I think he referred to Russia as a superpower. And yeah, so in this journal, he mentioned Russia as a superpower, and he said any self-respecting superpower would have invaded Ukraine if NATO is going to expand to Ukraine. And my heart really like I truly feel sorry for the Ukrainians, because they're helpless. This is not their war, and they elected Zelensky for 70% or so because he ran on a peace platform. This is what the Ukrainians wanted.
Yeah.
And in 2009 or 2010, they elected what was his name, Yanukovych, who was replaced. I always mix the names of the former Ukrainian president who fled the country and they couped him in 2014, and he chose neutrality. Yeah, he chose neutrality. He chose neutrality between the EU and NATO. And this is what the Ukrainians have voted for. They didn't vote for war against Russia. But the neocons, Nuland, they have a different opinion about these cases, and they are able to engineer crisis in these countries. And now that the invasion happened, there is no talk about diplomacy at all. There is always talk about deploying forces, sending more arms, and now, we have to introduce a military service in these countries. I truly believe that Europe is heading towards dark times with such politicians and such type of rhetoric. So I see that from now to 10 years, things will be worse in terms of the security, in terms of the economics, because how are they going to spend this money on the military? They're going to tax us either through inflation or through taxation. And both are the same. It's really sad to see that Europe cannot differentiate itself anymore from the American foreign policy model. Yeah. And the ones that are speaking against it are the far-right groups in Europe. And the far-right groups, if they come to power, they will also make social troubles in their own country. So either way, you see, it's a bleak
crisis. It's a cultural crisis, to be frank, within Europe and America. You'll notice it's the alternatives are always between one madman and another madman. It's I think this presents the cultural crisis that
exactly.
Oh yeah.
Danny, this was an amazing conversation with you today. We have been speaking now for around 55 minutes together. We will definitely have another talk together soon in the near future. We stay in touch. And there will be also the topic that is important for both of us, Armenia. Let's see how things will develop there. Maybe we do another panel with another guest or two, and Armenians also. We discuss what's happening with between Armenia vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, the Caucasus, and also the internal affairs of Armenia. But until then, I would like to thank you for coming to the show. It was a great chat with you. It's a really pleasure. And I would like to thank all the viewers of Syriana Analysis for tuning in today and watching this live streaming. And I would like to say, guys, tomorrow is, I know it's Friday, and I usually do my live streamings between Monday to Friday, 5 days per week. But tomorrow I cannot, unfortunately, do a live streaming due to family matter. So I will come back and do the live streaming next week on Monday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. If you like this content, guys, hit the like button. That's a really big help to me. And subscribe to the channel. 60% of the viewership are not subscribers. And if you want to support the independent work that I'm doing on Syriana Analysis, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.
And you too.